Hello fellow humans and welcome to the Type 71 tech tree review. Now, it took a while, yes, I know. However, I just wanted to wait out for update 9.1 and all the changes. Now, this is a bit unfortunate because this vehicle is actually going to get changed, so let's talk about that first. It is going to get slightly slower, but it isn't going to have that much of an impact of how the vehicle itself plays. On this tank, I would always use the gun depression. First, if you don't like the gun depression, you try the suspension. That's how I would run this tank. Now, before we do that, let's have a look at all the tanks in this tech tree, and let's obviously play them. So here we go, obviously tier 6 up to tier 10. Now, the DPM only really changes once. 2000, 2000, and then around 2500, 2600. So it doesn't really change much from the tier 8 towards the tier 10, which is not great. However, the alpha damage and the penetration does change. So you can see in terms of the gun, the tier 9 essentially has tier for tier a way better gun than the tier 10. It even has better heat penetration in this instance, so that's interesting. But anyway, let's leave it like that. Now, the Type 71 is relative to the GSA and the Type 68 fine. It's not an amazing tank, but it definitely does work. So, aim time and axis also very similar throughout the entire line. All of them have 6 degrees gun depression as standard. I definitely recommend using the gun depression equipment, however, because they have pretty strong turrets, so especially the tier 10. So the gun depression equipment is going to help quite a lot with that. So the linearity of this line is quite linear, which is nice, as in you progress up somewhat fine in terms of the gun. Now, the mobility is, again, somewhat the same to all intents and purposes. It doesn't change much. You have 40 kilometers now. The tier 8 only has 35. But the ground resistance most of the time are relatively similar. You get 12, 12, 13, and 14. So the tier 10 is slightly a bit faster there, but it does lose out on traverse speed a bit. So essentially, you have a bit more effective power to weight ratio, but a bit less traverse as you go up the tiers, which again is very solid. And again, hit points, you don't really gain that much, and the armor as well. You don't really gain that much from tier 9 towards the tier 10, especially in terms of the turret. However, let's have a look at the Type 71's armor, because that's where it essentially gets its strength from, and that's what makes it, well, possibly good. But the gun is very disappointing. The armor in this tank is essentially Swiss cheese with a twist, as in there are a lot of holes in it. You have the cupola on top. You can pen the cheeks here in a lot of positions. The turret ring down here, which is pretty exposed, you can pen that. The upper plate is pretty strong unless you fire it down on it, obviously. And the lower plate is pretty damn good as well. However, 240mm in a flat line, everyone's going to go through it. Anyway, this beam is pretty solid, 300mm. You're going to need tier 10 heat rounds. However, again, most tier 10 heat rounds are going to just butter straight through this if it's flat. You have to high roll for some of them, but let's say you're up against the tier 7 heavy or something like that. It has no chance, no armor in that regard. Now, obviously, against mediums, which is what this thing does well at, if you use the mobility equipment, it can sort of hunt mediums. However, then as a medium, you just go around. Now, what helps? It's a very long boy. A very long boy means it's harder to circle it, because obviously the medium has to go a longer distance around the vehicle to actually get around, which helps. Now, if you use the mobility equipment, you can get still circled by a leopard, if the leopard's competent, because the turret traverse in this tank doesn't exist. So that's a bit unfortunate right there. So it means you still can't keep your front armor where it's supposed to be, right? Now, that is kind of a problem there. However, overall, the tank is currently performing very well, mainly because of two things. First of all, people have adapted to it yet. And second of all, it has the perfect recipe to be a noob shot trap. Essentially, you have the pretty strong armor, you have weak spots that are very weak but hard to hit, and you have an armor profile that, if you don't understand how it works, is going to be really effective against you. And that's what makes this tank perform pretty well. Now, side armor, what is that even? You're going to have a couple of funky bounces because of this plate right here. You know, the side armor is sort of recessed. We don't have any sloping on the side armor except for all the way down here. So it is essentially just paper. Same with the turret. And obviously the rear is always paper on any tank, really, unless it's a mouse. So In terms of the armor, yeah, it's like the MX M440, the MX M454, really. As in, you have good front armor, but it has plenty of weaknesses, and it also has these plates here, like the MX M454, which means if you turn the vehicle, you don't make your armor stronger, you actually make it weaker, because then this plate becomes, the more you turn, the more pinnable this becomes. So side scraping might also be a problem, given that if you hide behind a house, like in this angle, you will be able to be pinned through this plate as well. That's a downside. Now, is it a strong tank? Yes or no? Well, it's fine, basically. It's not great. It's not bad. It works if you know what you're doing. However, the combination of bad DPM and bad alpha damage is kind of holding it back a bit. Now, it can be a good tank to start the game with, given that it's a noob shot trap, and you can sort of allow yourself a couple of mistakes with it. Just like with the T125, they work. However, not all the time. And that's now start at the tier 6, and as always, don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you very much to my channel members as well. There we go with a tier 6, and this is your stereotypical tier 6. It's not a bad tank, it's also not amazing, it's not going to dominate anything on the enemy team. However, it has solid alpha damage, solid armor, solid mobility, so it is going to work just fine. Plays like pretty much any other tier 6 heavy tank. And unlike that Eraser, I am not dumb enough to actually get a tank rank. However, if you do that, rock back and forth, you can get more gun depression to take your shots. Now, you have pretty solid third armor on this thing. It's quite nicely curved outwards, which means it's going to have some effective armor angles to it. So, this is definitely a somewhat usable vehicle. However, with premium ammo, as you can see, there isn't much armor there, which is true for a lot of tanks, and that's how it should be for most vehicles. That's how Wargaming balances it. You can pin it with standard ammo. You can't pin it with standard. You can pin it with premium. That's essentially the whole point of this line, most of the time. Except for the lower play, obviously, that's pinnable by all the time. Nope. Nope, that ain't it. Alright, we have a very unaware tiger that's kind of peeking a bit too much for his own good. So we're going to have to try to stay around here. That's that plate on this vehicle as well. That angles to the side. So, essentially if I'm like this, that Razor, if he shoots here, and he doesn't see my side, but he shoots that plate, he can still pin it, basically. So, it pretty much goes through the entire line. That's at least some consistency, which is very nice to see. Okay, now, I don't know where they pulled these tanks out, though, which, you know, archive they had to dig through to find hints of these, or whichever guy they had to commission to invent them. I don't know. So, let's have a look. 2 down on the enemy team. And that tiger is most likely going to be going down very quickly, which means I should probably get out of here, because you don't want to be in a 1vx situation at all times. It's essentially, you gotta make your move before the enemy knows their move. So, let's miss him by shooting too low. By the way, if that happens, you didn't actually hit the tank, because obviously the tracks of the vehicle, just a little trivia knowledge here, if you shoot too low on a tank, it hits the tracks, but it doesn't hit the tank, because obviously there's some dead space down here. Sounds obvious, but some people do forget that. So, you know, if you ever get a critical damage on the tracks, and it goes very low, just because it didn't hit the tank itself. So, now, there's not much interesting about this thing. You know, 220 alpha damage, 145 penetration. It is solid, it works, but it's nothing special. There we go. It is not a Smasher level, but it is also not a Aero Leaf 39 level. So, all good. Now, the Razor with 310 alpha damage. Again, he'll need some premium ammo to reliably get through the front, which is very useful. He's got the autoloader there. And now all we gotta do is get rid of this Razor. 2k damage. That's okay. And, for a tier 6. And that is relatively competitive. So, tier 6 already starts off in a pretty good way. And now we go with the tier 7, and this is probably the most donkey one of the line, because it does get an alpha damage upgrade, but it doesn't really get a DPM upgrade, and not an upgrade in much else either. Mobility pretty much stays the same for the entire line, so that is not much to be seen there in terms of difference. Most of what's happening is concerning the guns of these tanks, and you do have more alpha damage. You go up to 310. However, the DPM still stays the same. And the armor, while it might look mighty with its shield right there, it doesn't really have that much. And especially in a tier 8 game, you're going to get penned by pretty much everything. So you're going to have to be very careful. Tier 6s, they're going to not have a great time. But that's how it goes for a lot of vehicles. Now, if we are lucky here, then the entire enemy team is bad at this game. And they haven't gotten the important position, which is essentially all of this. If you're on this map, that's what you need. You need the island, and you need the ridgeline. That's what you need. Rest don't matter. Because then, you can also control these things, which means in a city, you can control that, and they can't do anything about you. And you're essentially going to win for free. Now, 160. That is, from what I'm seeing in AMX... Yeah. Like... Yeah. If you have this level of awareness, right, you can do anything. And that's the goal, right? And it doesn't really take that much. You just have to pay attention while you're playing, right? Pay attention while you're playing. You see what tanks are spotted, what tanks aren't spotted, and you know how to react. And way to go. Which is why I'm coming over here, because obviously I don't see any heavy tanks in a match like this. Heavy tanks, they're going to be city, so you want to cut them off from essentially destroying your rear, which is never a great idea. And especially now that the SU and the Britannia plant are kind of thrown away, it's very important to actually get the most out of this side first, because we can deal with the less threatening tanks later. I don't want to get shot for 1,000 damage by a smasher necessarily, so I would like to get rid of that first, obviously. Now, down 3 tanks, that is not very good. So, while the enemy team have gotten the bad position and essentially thrown that, you still need a good team to convert that position, which unfortunately does not seem to be the case here. Okay, now the KV-2 is on that side. I'm going to hope that I can make my way towards the ARL and take out the ARL before being challenged anywhere else. And then, ideally make my way over to the island to sort of gain a like safe position for me that I can use now. The KV-2 shouldn't be able to shoot me down there. But the Poodle is going to be very essential here in this game. 2.7k damage. I can take out the ARL with the next shot if I hit his turret properly. There we go. Because obviously, if I load the premium ammo, I do have less alpha damage. Now, these KV-2 shouldn't be able to pen me with the premium AP, which means I will be fine in that regard. 3,300 damage so far. There isn't much else he can do. Obviously, it's a KV-2. He's going to pen anyway because he has HE. Let's take a shot. It's the easier one right there. And now I do not have a loader, which means I am going to die. But 3,600 damage in a tier 7. That's pretty solid. And, I mean, yeah. Sometimes you get teams like this where you go to the correct side, but they just can't hold up when you start to fight. And that is very sad. Anyway, this vehicle can do very well if you're obviously a good and aware player. However, it is definitely on the worst side in terms of this entire line. And now, next one, the Cheese, or the Cheese, more accurately referred to. Now, this time, team's going to the wrong side. Let's hope they hold up in terms of the fighting this time. Because if they don't, that would be somewhat unfortunate. Now, you don't want to go to this side. One word, map control. That's 2 words, but anyway. Yeah. Now, this vehicle is sort of like an AMX M449 for poor people. You know, it pretty much does the same thing. If you use the gun depression, which I highly recommend doing, because, I mean, it's not gonna get faster than this. It ain't getting faster. It still locks out at 35 kilometers an hour. You're not gonna be able to hunt mediums. It turns reasonably fast anyway. So, the gun depression on this vehicle, for me, at least, is definitely the better choice. Obviously, if you want to try out the mobility, if you think that Atlas is going to help you, do so. However, I would recommend use the gun depression. If the gun depression works for you, stay with it. If it doesn't work for you, then maybe try out the mobility as well. And then if that doesn't work, then the tank simply doesn't work for you. Or you're just not good at the game, but that's another story. Anyway, let's now see what we can do. Ideally, what I want to do here is push out of this shitty position as quickly as possible, right? We want to get back to the good side, right? We're going to push them into the bad side, and we're going to get back to the good side. That is the best thing you can essentially do once your team has decided that they want to go to the bad side of the map. Now, Scorpion G, obviously, prime target, high alpha damage, very good tank. If that's a good player, we're in trouble. Which means, take that out first. It's obviously also easy to take out, so get rid of it. Now, camper in the bush. That should be possibly a Tiger 1. Has to be, essentially. So now, let's have a go at the M4 again. Barely. Okay. Now, we know there's a bush camper tiger, most likely, in there. Which means... Yeah, I know you're there, mate. Chill. Let's see if that pinned. Now, the tiger has some funky angles at the front, so it might have not pinned, but it most likely has. Okay, now. Again, gun depression. Can't use that. Almost. There we go. Aim. Close enough. Now, you can't do that with the mobility, and it doesn't really help that much in my eyes. So, I hit him, probably. There we go. Accuracy on these vehicles is good, but it could be better. It's not a level of accuracy where you can just, you know, get every shot. You have to pray that it hits for most of the time. But if you're a very close range, if you're not shooting at a small target, you will generally be very fine. Okay. Now, LTB is probably going to go down to that tiger, most likely. It's nothing surprising. So let's have a free shot there. 2k damage, that's fine-ish, but you also obviously want to increase that, and now I'm kind of in a middle of the entire enemy team, which you don't want to be in. So I'm going to take out the weakest target first, which will be the tiger. The M4 will not be a threat because he doesn't even know I'm here, as it seems, because he's going the other way. It's basically, if you know what the enemy's doing without looking at them for too long, you'll have a good time. Okay, got rid of that, and now we have a one-shot tiger and a one-shot shark. Well, T-54 E2. Shark's just a camel. It's not a tank. Hello. Bye. Never mind. Yeah, you can't shoot me anyway. Is he stock? I think he's... Yeah, that's the stock gun. That's another thing, right? If you can see what gun the guy has equipped, that helps as well. But it is something for the advanced level. And it has the DPM upgrade. You know, it has some armor. It is a pretty solid tier 8 and definitely in the better half of tier 8 tanks. Now, here we go with the next one, the Type 68, and you get a massive boost in penetration, but not in DPM at all. And you get higher alpha damage, higher penetration, but you don't really get higher DPM, which is a bit disappointing. Armor-wise, again, it's fine-ish, but obviously these angles are pinnable, especially down here, right next to the gun. That is something that is pinnable on round turrets like that. Now, obviously, how I would run this tank: gun depression, equipment, and calibrated. Why? Because essentially what you have here is a vehicle that, if you boost the mobility, where are you going to use it? It's not fast enough to be a medium tank. Medium tank's still going to run around it. So the gun depression is a lot more usable in a lot of situations, so I tend to go there. And then the calibrated, the DPM's already low, so you might as well use that. And the fact that they have heat, this and the Type 71, to your advantage, and make sure that the few shots that you essentially do have do actually pen as well. It's not a 113 where you can shoot 17 million times a minute. This is a tank where you gotta be careful with where you actually shoot and how many tanks you put in front of you. Now, obviously that 121B's got 1,000 DPM more than me, so fighting him directly would be a bad idea, but luckily he's on pretty low HP anyway. So it should be... Nope. Okay. Don't want to really get face-hugged by an IS-7 if possible. So my goal here is to get out as much as I can. However, obviously that Vickers is going to sit on my side, which means I'm going to prioritize the Vickers somewhat. He's going to bounce. Front armor is pretty good in that angle. IS-7's going to get done anyway. I don't know what he was thinking. But I essentially baited that guy into pushing into my entire team. And as you can see, 2-point-something K armor blocked. Ow, that works. The armor works. It's not amazing, but it definitely does work. If the enemy has absolutely no clue where to aim, and that's the strength of this and the Type 71, where if the enemy has no clue, and you have a bit of a clue, you can absolutely dominate in a vehicle like that. However, if you're up against a player that doesn't quite know what they're doing, the tank's not going to carry you. This is a tank, and a tier 10 as well. You gotta know what you're doing. it's not going to play itself. Unlike an E100 might. And E100 allows a lot more mistakes, and it's a lot more lenient on the player. Whereas a tank like this, you don't got DPM, you have pretty weak alpha damage for its DPM, it ain't gonna allow you to do that much. Now, the 6 DP, he's most likely gonna be looking at me. He just shot, which means he's gonna reload at about 0, 2.6k damage. I'm getting worse the higher the tiers go away. But anyway, let's have a look at the... Nope, not gonna get it. It's a great team. I don't know what the enemies were thinking, but absolutely overwhelmed. I went to the middle, baited the 1-to-1B and the IS-7, and that's a pretty good result for the team, and that's... Gotta give them credit for that. Type 71, the long boy. Let's go. Now, this is a good map for it because I can play the mid-range and use the 9 degrees of gun depression, which I definitely recommend you use on this vehicle to its full extent. I'm also using calibrated as equipment on this tank. Very simple, because obviously you don't have any DPM. Compared to a 113, compared to a Chieftain, compared to even a Super Conqueror, you don't really have much DPM in the first place. So trying to sort of boost that isn't going to help you much. So I would rather go for the calibrated to make sure that the few shots that you do have actually going to pen. Same with the E5, pretty much. Now, trim ammo into the Foch, 375mm of heat penetration. That is definitely going to work just about nicely. So, obviously, you can try, if the gun depression and the calibrate doesn't work for you, try the other way. If that doesn't work for you either, then you should have noticed that in Tier 7. Kind of. So, let's now see what we can pull off here. The mobility is helpful, however, it essentially gets bumped up against the top speed that will be nerfed to, I think, 37 kilometers an hour. So, you're not going to be able to hunt any medium tanks with 37 kilometers an hour top speed, and you can't hunt any mediums with 40 either. So, while you have better acceleration, it doesn't really change the characteristics of the vehicle too much. As you can see right here, I'm using the gun depression. I can still reasonably traverse myself towards that T100. So that's why I would definitely prefer the gun depression. Now, is it a good tank? Well, it's not great. Obviously not. It just lacks the DPM and alpha damage ratio. You know, a lot of low alpha damage tier 10s have high DPM. Well, heavies. Chieftain, 113, all that. A lot of high alpha damage tier 10s have low DPM. I7, E100, VK72, even the mouse. This thing has low alpha damage and low DPM, which ain't great. It's a balancing factor, that's for sure. The mobility, it's fine enough. It's not amazing. It's essentially somewhat on the faster side of medium tanks, but it's a heavium, pretty much. But it's definitely not a medium by any degree. I definitely can't hunt them either. So, it's like the E5, basically. Whereas, you have an E5 that's longer and equally unimpressive. Now, let's have a look at the Bat Shadow over there. That will be nice to obtain some damage from, because I haven't really done much yet. But let's see whether we can do something there. And actually get some damage, because that would be nice to have, you know? Get some damage in a game. That's helpful. Now, the Bat Shadow has two options. You can either go down there or you can go over there. I'm going to think he's going there. And hello. Yeah, you're not going to need the extra traverse speed if you're up against people that don't have that problem. And all you got to do is traverse or reverse up against the rock. No one can get around you. Poof. You're done. So, overall, this vehicle is solid. It is not amazing. However, obviously, if you're like a very, very good player, you're going to make it work. You're going to dominate like you do in any other tank as well. Now, obviously, Wargame is going to nerf it. It is performing very well because of its armor, right? Because it's that noob-proof armor. And even though the DPM is absolutely miserable, the armor does hold it together and make it a vehicle that is performing pretty good. That said, should you get this vehicle? Depends. If you have the T125, you're not missing out on much. If you don't have the T125, and you want to have something different to your regular heavy tanks like an IS-7 and IS-4, then it can definitely be a tank line worth considering. Alternatively, 60 TP exists as well. That can be also a very good option. With that said, thank you very much for watching. See you in the next one. Goodbye.